The turbulence hit without warning, sending the Bordeaux from my tray directly onto the lap of the most intimidating passenger in first class. I watched in absolute horror as the deep red wine soaked through the charcoal fabric of what was clearly an incredibly expensive suit, spreading across the lap of a strikingly handsome man in his late 20s who sat perfectly still in seat 2A. His ice-gray eyes lifted to meet mine with an intensity that made my breath catch, not with anger but with something far more unsettling, a predatory focus that seemed to catalog every detail of my horrified expression. "I am so sorry, sir," I gasped, grabbing napkins from my cart with shaking hands and reaching forward to dab at the spreading stain before realizing how inappropriate that was, and pulling back. "Please let me get you something. I can pay for the cleaning, I promise." My voice cracked on the last word because I absolutely could not afford to pay for cleaning a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Not with Leo's medical bills piling up, and my supervisor Patricia already looking for reasons to write me up. The passenger waved off my frantic apologies with a slight smile that never reached those pale, calculating eyes, his accent faintly Italian when he spoke. "It's just wine, Cara, though this suit cost more than you make in 6 months." The calm way he said it, not cruel but simply factual, made my stomach drop even further. Around us, other first-class passengers pretended not to watch while clearly absorbing every second of my humiliation, and I could see Patricia's pinched face appearing from the galley, her expression promising consequences I could not afford. "I'm sure you will pay for it," the man continued in that same unnervingly composed voice, still studying my face like I was a fascinating specimen under glass rather than a flight attendant who had just ruined his incredibly expensive clothing. The plane lurched again, and I grabbed the seat back to steady myself, my hands still trembling from adrenaline and dread. The wine had soaked through to his white dress shirt underneath. I could see the dark stains spreading, and the cream leather of his seat was splattered with drops that looked disturbingly like blood in the dim cabin lighting. Storm clouds pressed against the windows, turning the afternoon dark, and the fasten seatbelt sign dinged urgently, as if mocking my disaster. I forced myself to meet his eyes again, those strange pale gray eyes that seemed to see far too much, and found him still watching me with that slight predatory smile. Something about his absolute calm in the face of my catastrophe felt wrong, like a cat watching a mouse and deliberately not pouncing yet. I did not know it then, standing there with empty wine glass in hand and my career crumbling around me, but that spill would change absolutely everything about my life. That moment of clumsiness would lead me into a world I never knew existed, into the hands of a man who did not forgive accidents so much as collect them as leverage. But right then I only knew that I had just destroyed an $8,000 suit belonging to someone who looked at me like he was deciding whether I was worth keeping or discarding, and that Patricia was already moving down the aisle toward us with fire in her eyes. Patricia grabbed my elbow the moment I retreated to the galley, her fingers digging in with barely concealed satisfaction as she pulled me into the cramped space that smelled of reheated pasta and industrial cleaning solution. 3 incidents in 3 months, Chen, she said in that clipped voice that always made me feel about 2 inches tall, her cold eyes boring into mine under the harsh fluorescent lighting that made everyone look half dead. The wine spill was the final straw. My hands gripped the metal counter so hard my knuckles went white, my reflection in the steel surface showing a woman on the edge of complete panic, dark circles under my eyes from weeks of sleeping at the hospital with Leo, my hair escaping its regulation bun, my lipstick chewed off from anxiety. "Please, Patricia, I need this job," I heard myself say, and hated how my voice shook, how desperate I sounded. "My brother, he has medical bills and I'm his only family, and if I lose this position, I can't afford his treatment." She cut me off with a sharp gesture, clearly enjoying the power she held over me, the way my entire life balanced on her recommendation. "Not my problem," she said, pulling out her tablet and typing with sharp, efficient movements. Corporate will make the final decision, but I'm recommending immediate termination upon landing. The words hit me like physical blows, and I felt tears burning behind my eyes, felt my professional mask cracking completely as the reality crashed down. Without this job, I had nothing. Leo had nothing. The experimental treatment he needed cost more per month than I made in 6 months, and insurance barely covered half. Through the gap in the galley curtain, I could see back into the first-class cabin where the passenger from 2A had changed into a spare crew shirt that Marco, our head flight attendant, must have provided. The white fabric stretched tight across shoulders that were clearly too broad for our standard sizing. He was watching our exchange through the curtain gap with those unsettling ice-gray eyes, his expression thoughtful and calculating in a way that made my skin prickle with awareness. Something about the way he observed my humiliation felt deliberate, focused, like he was gathering information rather than simply being a curious passenger. Patricia was still talking, listing my infractions with relish. The time I had been late because Leo's fever spiked, the flight I had to call out of because his oncologist needed emergency consultation, this wine spill that was truly an accident but would be recorded as carelessness. I could barely hear her over the rushing in my ears, the constant hum of the engines vibrating through the galley floor, the smell of coffee burning in its pot because no one had remembered to turn it off. My entire world was collapsing, and all I could think about was Leo's face when I told him I couldn't afford his medication anymore, that we might have to stop treatment, that I had failed him the way I had failed at everything since our parents died. When I looked up again, the passenger in 2A was still watching, his head tilted slightly like he was solving a puzzle, and something in his gaze made me feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with Patricia's cruelty. He raised his hand slightly, gesturing for Marco, and I watched them have a brief, quiet conversation, the passenger's eyes never leaving my face through the curtain gap. Whatever he was planning, whatever thoughts were moving behind those calculating gray eyes, I was too destroyed to care about anything except the fact that in approximately 7 hours, I would land in Milan, and my life as I knew it would be over. I had locked myself in the crew bathroom near baggage claim and cried until my eyes were swollen and red, until I had no tears left and only a hollow, exhausted numbness remained. When I finally emerged with my carry-on bag and rumpled uniform, preparing to find the cheapest hotel I could afford for my mandated layover before the termination became official, I found him waiting near the arrival gate like he had known exactly where I would appear. The passenger from 2A stood perfectly still amid the chaos of Malpensa Airport, looking completely immaculate despite the wine incident hours earlier. Now wearing a fresh suit that probably cost even more than the ruined one, his dark hair perfectly styled, and those ice-gray eyes finding me immediately in the crowd. I tried to walk past him, but he stepped smoothly into my path, pulling a business card from his inner jacket pocket, with movements that seemed almost choreographed. "I believe we should discuss compensation for the ruined suit," he said in that accent that wrapped around vowels like silk, and something about his tone made it clear this was not really about dry cleaning bills. "I don't think that's appropriate, mister," I started, too exhausted to even care about propriety anymore. "Moretti," he supplied with that slight predatory smile. "Dante Moretti, and I insist on dinner tonight at 8 at Ristorante Crocco. My driver will collect you from your hotel." The casual way he stated it, not asking but informing, should have made me refuse immediately, should have sent me running in the opposite direction. "I haven't agreed to anything," I said, but my voice lacked conviction because something about his absolute certainty was magnetic in a way I could not explain. "You will agree," he replied, those pale eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Because you're curious about why I'm making this offer, and because you need what I'm offering." The words hung between us. In the busy terminal, announcements echoing in Italian and English, the sound of rolling suitcases clicking across tile, travelers rushing past us while we stood in this strange bubble of tension. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, I could see a sleek black town car idling at the curb, a driver in a dark suit standing beside it with military posture, clearly waiting for his employer. Everything about this man screamed wealth and power, from his perfectly tailored clothing to the way he commanded space without raising his voice, and I knew I should walk away from whatever this was. But I also knew that in approximately 12 hours, I would be unemployed with a brother dying of leukemia and medical debt that would bury me for the rest of my life, and this strikingly handsome man in his late 20s was looking at me like I was something valuable he had decided to acquire. "What exactly are you offering?" I heard myself ask, hating how desperate I sounded, but too tired to maintain pretense. "Dinner first," he said, pressing his business card into my hand, his fingers brushing mine in a touch that felt deliberate. "Then we'll discuss terms." The card was heavy cream stock with his name embossed in gold, Dante Moretti, and a phone number, but no company name or title, the kind of card that assumed you already knew who he was. I should have thrown it away the moment he walked off toward that waiting town car. Should have recognized the danger in a man who bought expensive meals to discuss compensation for accidents, but instead I found myself clutching it like a lifeline. I watched him slide into the back seat of the town car with fluid grace, watched the vehicle pull away from the curb and disappear into Milan traffic, and felt the weight of a choice I had not yet made, but somehow knew I would make pressing down on me like the humid Italian air. The hotel room was exactly what €50 a night bought you in Milan, yellowing wallpaper that might have been white decades ago, a single window overlooking an industrial district where factories belched smoke into the twilight sky, and a bed with springs that creaked whenever I shifted my weight. I sat cross-legged on the thin mattress with my laptop balanced on my knees, the screen's glow illuminating my face in the gathering darkness because I was too cheap to turn on the lamp and waste electricity. "Dante Moretti," I typed into the search bar, and watched results populate with a mixture of dread and fascination I could not suppress. CEO of Moretti Holdings appeared first. A legitimate businessman with interests in real estate development, Mediterranean shipping routes, luxury goods importation, his corporate photo showing him in a perfectly tailored suit with those ice-gray eyes staring confidently at the camera. But when I dug deeper, past the sanitized corporate websites and press releases, I found other articles, older ones that used words like alleged and rumored and connected. The Moretti family was not just a business dynasty, but one of Italy's most powerful crime syndicates, their roots stretching back generations through Naples and Sicily, their influence reaching into politics and finance and places I could barely comprehend. Antonio Moretti, Dante's father, had been assassinated 8 years ago in what newspapers carefully called a business dispute, gunned down outside a restaurant in Florence, while his 17-year-old son watched. Dante had taken control of the family operations at 25, ruthlessly consolidating power, eliminating rivals, and somehow managing to legitimize enough of the business to maintain a veneer of respectability. My stomach churned as I clicked through images of him at charity galas in Rome, at business conferences in Geneva, always in expensive suits, always with that same controlled expression, handsome in a way that felt dangerous, like admiring a predator through cage bars. "What am I doing?" I whispered to the empty room. "This man is connected to the Mafia, the actual Mafia Maya. I should cancel, should block whatever number he had somehow obtained, should flee back to New York on the first available flight and accept unemployment as the safer option compared to whatever this was." My phone buzzed on the nightstand, making me jump so hard I nearly dropped my laptop. The text was from an unknown number. "Don't be late," it read. "Dante doesn't appreciate waiting." My hands shook as I typed back, "How did you get this number?" The reply came within seconds. "I get whatever I want, Kara. 8 p.m. The casual certainty of it, the way he had acquired my personal cell phone number that was not listed on any airline documentation, sent ice water through my veins, and something else. Something I did not want to examine too closely that felt almost like excitement. I looked back at my laptop screen, where an article detailed alleged Moretti family involvement in everything from contract killings to political corruption, where Dante's face stared out from a photo taken at his father's funeral, his expression carved from stone, and I knew I should be terrified. Instead, I found myself studying that face, the strong jawline and sharp cheekbones, the way he carried himself with absolute confidence born from knowing he was untouchable, and feeling a pull I could not rationally explain. The smart choice was obvious. Pack my bag, check out tonight, disappear before 8 p.m. arrived, and whatever this dinner invitation really meant could unfold. But I also knew that smart choices did not pay for experimental leukemia treatments, did not solve the $180,000 in medical debt crushing me, did not change the fact that I would be unemployed in less than 24 hours with no prospects and a dying brother depending on me. I closed my laptop and sat in the darkness of that cheap hotel room, listening to factory sounds drift through the thin window, and admitted to myself what I had known since he pressed that business card into my hand at the airport. I was going to that dinner. I was going to walk straight into whatever trap or opportunity Dante Moretti was offering, because desperate people did desperate things, and I had been desperate for so long, I barely remembered what safety felt like anymore. Marco arrived at 7:30 exactly, a man in his 50s with military bearing and eyes that missed nothing, holding open the door of the same black town car I had seen at the airport. The drive through Milan felt surreal, the city lights blurring past tinted windows, while I sat in leather seats that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, my cheap dress from a discount store feeling increasingly inadequate with each passing block. Ristorante Krakow occupied the top floor of a building in the historic center, and when we arrived I realized with growing dread that the entire rooftop terrace had been reserved, empty except for a single table set for two overlooking the glittering sprawl of Milan at night. Dante stood as I approached, pulling out my chair with old-world courtesy that felt almost mocking given the circumstances, and I noticed he had changed again into yet another immaculate suit, charcoal gray this time, with a wine-colored tie that reminded me sickeningly of the spill that had started all this. The meal was 7 courses of culinary artistry I barely tasted, each dish appearing and disappearing, courtesy of silent waiters who moved like ghosts, and through it all Dante talked. He talked about my brother Leo's acute lymphoblastic leukemia, diagnosed 14 months ago, about the experimental treatment at Sloan Kettering that insurance would not cover, about the $180,000 in medical debt I had accumulated trying to keep him alive. He talked about my eviction notice, 3 months overdue on rent, about my father's gambling debts that I had inherited after his heart attack, about every private shame and desperate secret I possessed, and with each revelation I felt more violated, more exposed, more furious. "How dare you investigate me?" I finally interrupted as he was cutting his steak with surgical precision, the knife moving through meat like it was butter. "I investigate everyone who interests me," he replied without looking up, those pale gray eyes finally lifting to meet mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "And you, Maya Chen, are very interesting." "This is insane," I said, my voice rising enough that I had to consciously lower it. "Personal flight attendant. What does that even mean?" "It means you fly with me exclusively," he explained as calmly as if discussing weather, occasionally sipping wine that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Wherever I go, whenever I need to travel, you're mine for 1 year. Salary of $500,000 plus all medical expenses covered." The number hit me like a physical blow, enough to pay off every debt, enough to save Leo's life, enough to start over completely, and I hated how my treacherous brain immediately began calculating what that money could do. "I'm not something to be owned," I said, gripping my napkin hard enough that my knuckles went white. "Aren't you?" he countered, setting down his wine glass and leaning forward slightly. "Your debt owns you right now. Your brother's illness owns you. I'm simply offering to transfer ownership to someone who will actually take care of you." The casual cruelty of the statement, the way he laid bare the truth of my powerlessness, made me want to throw my wine in his face and storm out. But I also knew he was right. Knew that I was already owned by circumstances beyond my control, and at least this owner was offering compensation that could change everything. His eyes never left my face, reading every micro-expression, every flicker of hope and fury and desperation that I could not quite hide. And I realized he had already won before I had even sat down. He knew I would say yes, because he had done his research, had identified exactly what leverage would work, had presented his offer with the confidence of someone who always got what he wanted. The terrace was silent except for distant city sounds far below, the scent of truffle and expensive wine hanging in the air, candlelight casting shadows across his face, that made him look almost demonic. What exactly would this position entail? I heard myself ask, and hated how my voice shook. Everything, he said simply. You'll live in accommodations I provide, fly when I fly, be available whenever I need you. For 1 year, you belong to me completely. And after that year, I'm free, I clarified. After that year, he agreed. You're free with enough money to disappear anywhere you want. Leo will be healthy, and you'll never have to think about debt or desperation again. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the terrace floor with a sound that shattered the careful atmosphere, ready to walk away with whatever dignity I had left. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Moretti, but I cannot accept your offer, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'll find another way to handle my situation, one that doesn't involve selling myself to a man who thinks he can buy people. I had taken perhaps 3 steps toward the exit when his phone rang, the sound cutting through the night air like a blade. He answered in rapid Italian, his expression shifting from calm to something darker, more satisfied, and I found myself frozen despite my intention to leave, watching him conduct whatever business had interrupted our conversation. When he ended the call and looked up at me, that slight predatory smile was back. I'm afraid circumstances have changed, he said, gesturing for me to return to the table. You might want to check your email. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, some instinct telling me that whatever I was about to see would change everything. The email from Skyline Airways corporate headquarters had arrived 4 minutes ago, the subject line reading, "Immediate promotion and reassignment." I opened it with a sense of dreamlike dread and read words that could not possibly be real. Congratulations on your promotion to executive private flight attendant, effective immediately. Assigned exclusively to valued client Dante Moretti. Refusal to accept this assignment constitutes breach of contract and will result in immediate termination with no severance and possible legal action for damages. My legs gave out, and I sank back into the chair, the phone nearly slipping from my nerveless fingers. You bought the airline, I whispered, looking up at him with a mixture of horror and disbelief. I told you, Maya, he replied calmly, reaching for his wine glass. I get what I want, and I want you close. This is insane. My voice was rising again, but I could not control it. This is kidnapping or blackmail or something illegal. This is employment, he corrected. Very generous employment that you're free to refuse, though we both know what that refusal will cost you. The sheer audacity of it, the incomprehensible power required to purchase an entire airline in the span of a few hours just to trap one person, made my head spin. Skyline Airways was not some small regional carrier but a mid-sized international airline with hundreds of employees and dozens of aircraft, and he had acquired it like someone buying a car, casually, efficiently, simply to ensure I could not escape. We both know that's not true, I said, fighting back the hysterical laugh building in my throat. You've made sure I have no choice. Then we understand each other, he agreed, and something in his expression shifted, became almost gentle. Your first flight is tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Marco will collect you from your hotel at 5. Don't be late. The rooftop terrace that had seemed romantic when I arrived now felt like a gilded cage. Milan's lights spread below us, no longer beautiful, but isolating, and the cooling night air raised goosebumps along my arms that had nothing to do with temperature. Dante sat there with his face half in shadow from the candles, looking like some Renaissance painting of a devil making deals for souls. And the city below remained oblivious to the fact that my entire life had just been purchased along with an airline. I should have been terrified, and I was. But underneath the fear ran something else I did not want to acknowledge. A dark thrill at being wanted this intensely. At being valuable enough that someone would move mountains and buy companies just to keep me close. "What are you?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of man does something like this?" "The kind who sees what he wants and takes it," he replied, standing and moving around the table toward me. "The kind who protects his investments, and you, Maya, are an investment I intend to protect very carefully." He extended his hand to help me up, a courtesy that felt absurd given he had just trapped me. Completely. But I took it anyway because what choice did I have? His fingers were warm and strong around mine, and when I stood, we were close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and leather, close enough to see that his eyes were not purely gray, but flecked with silver like winter ice. "Welcome to your new life," he said softly. "I promise you won't regret it." Marco collected me from the hotel at 5 a.m. exactly, my hastily packed suitcase feeling inadequate for whatever this new life entailed, and drove not to the main terminal at Malpensa, but to a private aviation facility on the far side of the airfield. What awaited me on the tarmac made my breath catch, despite my determination to remain unimpressed. A custom Boeing 787 Dreamliner painted glossy black with silver accents, larger than any private aircraft I had ever seen, clearly retrofitted from commercial use into something that belonged in a billionaire's fantasy. The interior was beyond opulent, all cream leather and polished marble and soft recessed lighting that made everything glow like we were inside a jewel, a full bar with crystal decanters, an office area with conference table, and through an open door, I glimpsed a bedroom suite that had no business existing on an aircraft. I stood in the main cabin trying to process this level of wealth while the crew moved around me with practiced efficiency, the pilots nodding respectfully as they headed to the cockpit, two men in dark suits who were clearly security taking positions near the exit, everyone treating Dante with a reverent fear that made my skin prickle. He arrived 10 minutes before departure, immaculate in a navy suit despite the early hour, those ice-gray eyes finding me immediately and traveling slowly down my body in assessment. "Your uniform suits you better than Skyline's ever did," he commented, and I realized that somehow a new uniform had appeared in my hotel room while I slept, perfectly tailored charcoal gray with subtle silver piping that matched his aircraft, fitting me better than anything I had ever worn. "It's just a uniform, Mr. Moretti," I replied, clinging to professionalism like a shield. "It's Dante," he corrected, settling into one of the oversized leather seats. "We'll be spending considerable time together, so formality seems unnecessary." "Formality is all that's keeping this professional," I said, moving to the galley area to busy myself with pre-flight preparations I did not actually need to do since there were no other passengers. "Who said I wanted it professional?" His voice came from directly behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, and I spun to find him invading my space deliberately, standing near enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. The aircraft began taxiing, and I used it as an excuse to step around him, to retreat to the jump seat and buckle in, hyper-aware of his gaze following me, studying me like I was a puzzle he intended to solve. We lifted into the dawn sky, and I watched Milan fall away below us, watched Italy become a patchwork of fields and mountains, and then just clouds, and felt the reality of my situation settle over me like a weight. I was alone at 40,000 feet with a dangerous man who had bought an entire airline to trap me, surrounded by his employees who feared him, flying toward Prague for business I was certain involved activities no legitimate businessman would conduct. When we reached cruising altitude, I unbuckled and began the service I had been hired to provide, preparing coffee the way he took it according to files that had mysteriously appeared with my new uniform, black with 1 sugar, in a specific porcelain cup that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to be. His fingers brushed mine deliberately when he took the cup, the contact sending an unwelcome jolt of electricity up my arm, and his slight smile told me he had noticed my reaction. "Tell me about your brother," he said conversationally as I tried to retreat again. "What's his prognosis with proper treatment?" "That's personal," I replied stiffly. "Everything about you is my business now, Maya," he countered, sipping his coffee while those pale eyes pinned me in place. "I've already read his medical files, but I want to hear it from you." The casual admission that he had accessed Leo's private medical records should have enraged me, but I was too exhausted from a sleepless night to maintain that anger. "He has a 60% chance of remission with the experimental protocol at Sloan Kettering," I heard myself say. "Without it, maybe 20%, the disease is aggressive and the standard treatments aren't working." "And now he'll get that protocol," Dante said. "Because you're here, because you made the right choice even though you hate that it was the only choice." I turned away to stare out the window at endless clouds, fighting tears I refused to let him see. The hum of the engines was different from commercial aircraft, more of a purr than a roar, and the cabin felt simultaneously enormous and claustrophobic. "You didn't give me a choice," I said quietly. "I gave you the only choice that mattered," he replied. "Your pride or your brother's life. I think you chose correctly." The hotel was 5-star luxury in Old Town Prague, all Art Nouveau elegance and discreet service, and I had been given a room 3 floors below Dante's penthouse suite, with instructions to remain available at all hours. I had finally fallen into restless sleep around midnight when the gunshots shattered the quiet, sharp cracks that echoed up through the building, followed by shouting in multiple languages and the sound of running feet. Before I could even process what was happening, Marco burst through my door with 2 other men I recognized from the aircraft, his face grim as he barked orders. "Get dressed now," he said, tossing me clothes from my suitcase. "We're moving you to the penthouse." My hands shook so badly could barely pull on jeans and a sweater, terror making me clumsy as more gunshots rang out from somewhere below, closer now, and the men surrounded me like a human shield as we moved to the stairwell. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the Vltava River, and they deposited me there before disappearing back into whatever violence was unfolding in the building, leaving me alone with floor-to-ceiling windows, showing Prague's illuminated spires and my own terrified reflection. I sat on the leather sofa, shaking, listening to distant sirens and trying to understand what was happening, trying to convince myself this was not real, that I had not actually stepped into a world where people shot at each other in luxury hotels. Dante returned as dawn was breaking over the river, his shirt stained with blood that I desperately hoped was not his expression carved from stone, until his eyes found me, and something shifted, softened. "You're awake," he observed, moving to the bar and pouring 2 glasses of whiskey despite the early hour. "I could not sleep after men with guns invaded the hotel," I replied, my voice coming out shakier than I wanted. "Is this what you wanted me to see? That I'm in danger every moment I'm near you?" "No," he said, bringing me one of the glasses and sitting beside me on the sofa, carefully not touching me, respecting my space for the first time since this arrangement began. "I wanted you to understand why I need someone I can trust. Everyone in my world has an agenda, wants something from me, fears me or tries to use me. Except you. You just spilled wine on me." The whiskey burned going down, but I was grateful for something to do with my shaking hands. "This is insane, Dante. People are trying to kill you. People have been trying to kill me since I was 17, he replied calmly, unbuttoning his blood-stained shirt to reveal a muscled torso marked with scars, one particularly vicious line across his ribs that looked like it had nearly killed him once. "You're safer with me than without me now." "How do you figure that?" I demanded, gesturing at the blood-stained shirt he was discarding. "Because now you're under my protection," he said, those ice-gray eyes holding mine with absolute certainty. "And I protect what's mine." The Constantine family just learned that lesson very clearly. I wanted to argue, wanted to rage at him for dragging me into this nightmare, but exhaustion and adrenaline crash were making my thoughts sluggish. "Who are the Constantine family?" I asked instead. "Rivals," he explained, sipping his whiskey. "They've been trying to move into my territories for years. Tonight was their third attempt on my life and their last. I made sure of that." The casual way he said it, the implication that he had just killed people or ordered them killed, should have sent me running. Instead, I found myself studying him in the growing dawn light, seeing past the calculated businessman to something rawer underneath, someone who had been fighting to survive since he was barely more than a child. "Your father," I said quietly, remembering the articles I had read. "He was killed when you were 17. Dante's expression went very still, very controlled. He was executed in front of me at a restaurant in Florence. I was supposed to die too, but Marco got to me first, got me out. And then you took over his organization. I had no choice," he said. And for the first time I heard something like vulnerability in his voice. It was take control or be killed by the men who saw me as a weak child, so I became someone they feared more than they feared my father. We sat in silence as sunrise painted Prague's skyline gold and pink, the smell of whiskey and gunpowder hanging in the air, distant sirens still wailing, and I realized I was seeing the real Dante Moretti for the first time. Not the confident businessman or the controlling manipulator, but a man who had been forged in violence and loss, who protected what was his with lethal efficiency because he had learned young that showing weakness meant death. I found the file in the galley during the flight to Tokyo, a manila folder that had definitely not been there during my pre-flight check, placed conspicuously on the counter like someone wanted me to find it. My hands shook as I opened it and saw my own face staring back from a surveillance photo I had not known existed, followed by page after page of information that stripped away every shred of privacy I had ever possessed. Maya Chen, born in San Francisco. Mother Elizabeth died of ovarian cancer when Maya was 12 years old. Father Thomas' spiral into gambling addiction began 6 months after wife's death. Maya raised younger brother Leo, age 7, while working part-time jobs through high school. The level of detail was terrifying. Bank statements showing every purchase I had made for the last 3 years. Medical records including the therapy I had attended after my ex-boyfriend Jason cheated with my former best friend. Transcripts from nursing school showing the classes I had nearly failed while trying to work full-time to support Leo after our father's fatal heart attack. They knew everything, every humiliating detail, every private shame, every moment of weakness I had tried to hide from the world. I stormed into the main cabin with the file clutched in my shaking hands, my professional mask completely shattered by rage so intense it felt like burning. "You had me investigated like I'm a criminal," I shouted, hurling the folder onto his desk, where papers scattered across polished wood. Dante looked up from his laptop without surprise, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up, clearly having expected this confrontation. "I had you investigated like you're important to me," he corrected calmly. "There's a difference. I'm not important to you," I shot back, my voice rising higher. "I'm an employee you're obsessed with controlling. You've stripped away every piece of privacy I have. You know, things about me that I've never told anyone." "You're right," he agreed, standing and moving around the desk toward me. "I am obsessed with controlling you, because if I don't, then someone else will, and they won't care about your safety the way I do." "This isn't protection, Dante," I said, backing up until I hit the cabin wall. "This is possession. This is you playing God with my life, because you have the money and power to do it." The aircraft hit turbulence, and I grabbed the wall for balance while papers from the file slid across his desk. Documentation of my entire existence spread out like evidence at a crime scene. He moved closer, not touching me, but close enough that I could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, close enough to smell his cologne mixing with the leather scent of the cabin. "In my world, knowledge is survival," he said, his voice low and intense. "I needed to know if you were a threat, if you could be used against me, if someone had planted you on that flight to get close to me. I needed to know if you were genuine or if this was an elaborate setup." "And what did you decide?" I demanded, my anger making me reckless. "That I'm genuine enough to trap and control." "I decided you're genuine," he replied. "I decided you're someone who has been surviving against impossible odds your entire life, taking care of everyone around you while no one took care of you, working yourself to exhaustion for a brother who depends on you and a father who destroyed himself with his addictions. I decided you deserved better than the hand life dealt you. So you decided to deal me a new hand without asking if I wanted it," I shot back. "You decided to investigate every private moment of my life, to read my therapy notes about Jason's betrayal, to know about the scholarship I lost when I had to drop out to care for Leo, to have all of that information so you could manipulate me more effectively." The turbulence worsened, and the fasten seatbelt sign dinged, but neither of us moved, locked in this confrontation in the confined space with nowhere to escape. "I'm not sorry I investigated you," Dante said flatly. "In my world, trust gets you killed. Information keeps you alive. Everyone I've ever trusted without verification has either betrayed me or died because I didn't protect them well enough." His jaw tightened. "I won't make that mistake with you." "I'm not yours to protect," I whispered. But my anger was starting to crack into something more complicated. "You became mine the moment you spilled that wine," he replied. "The moment I saw you apologize like you had committed some terrible crime instead of just a human accident. The moment I saw someone who was genuine in a world full of pretense. You became important, and I investigate what's important to me, because that's how I keep it safe." The call came at 2 a.m. Tokyo time, Leo's oncologist, Dr. Patterson, with news that made my blood turn to ice. His condition had deteriorated rapidly over the past 48 hours. The current protocol was failing, and they needed to move immediately to an experimental treatment that insurance had denied 3 times already. The cost was $250,000, and they needed an answer within 24 hours, or they would have to pursue palliative care instead, which was a polite way of saying they would let my baby brother die as comfortably as possible. I sat on the hotel bed after the call ended and broke completely, sobbing into my hands with a desperation that felt like drowning, because I had no way to get that kind of money, even with Dante's salary. Not fast enough. Not in time. The door to my room opened without a knock, and I looked up to see Dante standing there in dark slacks and an unbuttoned white shirt, clearly having heard my crying through the adjoining suite door, and the expression on his face shifted when he saw me broken and helpless. "What happened?" he asked, moving into the room without invitation, and I was too destroyed to care about boundaries or propriety anymore. "Leo needs experimental treatment, and I don't have the money," I managed through tears. $250,000 by tomorrow, or they're giving up on him." Dante pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking rapidly in what sounded like Japanese, his free hand running through his hair in the first gesture of agitation I had ever seen from him. I tried to protest, tried to tell him he did not need to get involved, but he held up one finger silencing me while he continued his conversation. Within 20 minutes, he had made 4 more calls and then sat beside me on the bed, close enough that our legs touched. "It's done," he said simply. "Leo is being airlifted to Tokyo Cancer Institute within the hour. Dr. Yamamoto is the best pediatric oncologist in Asia, and he's taking personal charge of the case, all expenses covered." "I can't accept this," I whispered, even though I knew I would, knew I had to. "It's too much. This isn't what our arrangement was about." "It's already done," he replied, and something in his voice was gentler than I had ever heard it. "Leo is being airlifted as we speak. By tomorrow morning, he'll be receiving treatment that will give him a real chance." Why? I asked, searching his face for answers. Why would you do this for someone you don't know? For a situation that isn't your responsibility? Because I can, he said, reaching out to brush tears from my cheek with surprising tenderness. Because you need it. Because watching you break over something I can fix with a phone call seems unnecessarily cruel. He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face, gone so quickly I almost missed it. Because I know what it's like to lose family, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone, especially not you. This doesn't change anything between us, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were a lie. Doesn't it? He asked quietly, his hand still resting against my face. You're crying in front of me, letting me see you vulnerable, letting me help with the thing that matters most to you. I'd say that changes quite a bit. The Tokyo skyline glittered beyond the sheer curtains, neon lights bleeding through the fabric in blues and pinks, rain streaking the windows and turning everything into an impressionist painting. I was wearing yoga pants and an old college sweatshirt, the first time Dante had seen me in anything except the uniform he had provided, and somehow that felt more intimate than anything else, more exposing than his investigation files or his control over my employment. The scent of cherry blossoms from the hotel's signature candles filled the room, mixing with his cologne, and I realized he had entered my private space, my bedroom, and I had not even thought to protest. You work for me, he said, standing finally and moving toward the door. I take care of what's mine. Your brother's health is part of that now, part of taking care of you. He paused in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. Try to sleep, Maya. Leo will need you strong when you see him tomorrow. After he left, I sat in the darkness listening to Tokyo traffic far below and felt the full weight of what had just happened settling over me like a blanket made of chains. He had saved Leo's life with 4 phone calls, had moved mountains while I sat helpless, and now I owed him something far greater than the year of service we had agreed to. I owed him my brother's life, and we both knew that was a debt that could never truly be repaid. The business dinner in Tokyo had been excruciating, 12 men in expensive suits speaking rapid Japanese, while I served course after course of kaiseki cuisine. Feeling like an ornament Dante had brought to display his wealth and power. He had barely looked at me during the meal, but I felt his awareness constantly, felt the way the other men assessed me and made assumptions about what my presence meant. And by the time we returned to the aircraft, I was exhausted and humiliated in ways I could not articulate. Dante had drunk more than I had ever seen him consume, glass after glass of sake during dinner, and now whiskey on the plane, his tie removed and shirt unbuttoned at the collar, as he sprawled in his seat with uncharacteristic lack of control. Do you know what it's like, Maya? He asked suddenly, his words only slightly slurred, his ice-gray eyes finding me where I sat across from him, trying to remain professional. To have everyone afraid of you, to walk into a room and watch people calculate how to use you or avoid you, to know that every smile is fake and every conversation is strategy. No, I admitted, curling my legs under me in the seat. I'm usually the one afraid. Not of me, though, he said, leaning forward slightly. Not really. You're angry at me. You're trapped by circumstances I created. But you're not afraid. You look me in the eye when everyone else looks away. Maybe I should be afraid, I replied quietly. The cabin lights were dimmed for the night flight, and through the windows I could see we were approaching Singapore, the city's lights beginning to appear on the dark horizon like scattered diamonds. Yes, you should be, he agreed, running a hand through his hair and destroying its usual perfect styling. You should be terrified because I'm exactly what everyone thinks I am. I've killed people, Maya, ordered deaths, done things that would make you sick if you knew the details. The casual admission should have sent me running, but instead, I found myself listening, understanding something about the weight he carried. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I'm drunk enough to be honest, he said with a bitter smile. Because that moment when you spilled wine on me, When you looked absolutely horrified and started apologizing like you'd committed some terrible crime? That was the first time in years anyone treated me like a normal person. His voice dropped lower, more raw. You didn't know who I was, didn't fear me or want something from me. You just saw a man with a ruined suit and felt genuinely bad about it. It disarmed me completely. I had not expected this vulnerability, had not expected to see past the controlled businessman to something broken underneath. Your father, I said gently. What was it like, watching him die? It was like watching my childhood end in the space of 3 gunshots, Dante replied, staring at nothing. I was 17, and I watched him bleed out on a restaurant floor, while his killers made sure I understood this was a message. His jaw tightened. Then I had to become someone more brutal than they were, had to prove I could be worse than the worst of them, or they would have killed me too. I was a kid, and I had to execute men who had worked for my father just to establish dominance. The loneliness in his voice was palpable, the isolation of someone who could never let their guard down. Never trust anyone without verification. Never show weakness without inviting death. Everyone in my world fears me or wants to use me, he continued. The men at dinner tonight. They smiled and made deals, but they would cut my throat if they thought they could get away with it. Marco is loyal because he loved my father, but even he keeps parts of himself hidden. His eyes found mine again. Then you spilled wine on me and apologized like my feelings mattered. Like I was just another passenger instead of Dante Moretti who commands fear and respect, and I could not stop thinking about it. The intimacy of the confession, of sitting in darkness at 40,000 feet while he stripped away his armor, made something shift inside me. I'm still angry at you, I said honestly, for trapping me, for investigating me, for controlling every aspect of my life. I know, he replied. You should be. I gave you no choice because I knew if I gave you the option to refuse, you would have walked away, and I could not accept that. The lights of Singapore were growing brighter ahead. Of us, the city sprawling across the darkness like a galaxy fallen to Earth. Why me specifically, I asked. Why become obsessed with someone you saw for 30 seconds on a flight? Because authenticity is the rarest thing in my world, he said simply. Because everyone performs for me and you just existed. You were exhausted and worried and trying your best. And when you made a mistake, you owned it immediately. No excuses or deflection. He leaned back in his seat, vulnerability written across features that were usually so controlled. I'm glad you're not afraid of me, Maya, even though you should be, because being feared by everyone gets lonely. The hotel boutique was exactly the kind of place I would never normally enter. All glass cases and soft lighting and prices that made my stomach clench despite the unlimited credit card Dante had provided, as another golden handcuff binding me to him. I was examining a silk scarf that cost more than I used to make in a month when 3 men entered speaking rapid Italian, clearly thinking they were safe to talk freely in a language most tourists would not understand. My grandmother had been from Naples, and I had grown up speaking Italian as fluently as English, so I understood perfectly when one of them said, "Check the security exits," and another replied, "The Moretti girl is alone now while he's in his meeting." My heart stopped as the full implication hit me. They were discussing kidnapping me to leverage against Dante, debating whether to take me here or wait until I was in the parking garage, one suggesting they could get 10 million easily for her return. My hand moved to the panic button Dante's security had given me on a bracelet that looked like jewelry, pressing it hard as I backed toward the boutique entrance, trying not to run and alert them. The men noticed my movement and their casual conversation shifted instantly to action, one moving to block the door while the others advanced, and I ran. I sprinted through the hotel corridor in heels that were not meant for running, my breath coming in panicked gasps as I heard them behind me, their footsteps echoing on marble floors. Marco appeared from nowhere with 2 other security team members, moving with brutal efficiency. That was terrifying, even though they were protecting me. I watched one of the attackers go down with a crack that I knew was his skull hitting marble. Watched blood spread across pristine white tile in a pool that seemed impossible. Watched a man die in front of me while hotel guests screamed and scattered. The other two attackers tried to fight back, but Marco's team was faster, more violent, and within seconds it was over, except for my own gasping breath and the bile rising in my throat. I made it to a decorative planter before vomiting, my whole body shaking so hard I could barely stand. The image of that spreading blood burned into my vision. Dante arrived like a storm, fury written across every line of his body, his eyes scanning the scene and landing on the dead man with something cold and satisfied before finding me. When he saw me trembling and pale, his entire demeanor shifted, rage redirecting to something protective and almost tender as he crossed to me and pulled me against his chest. "I'll kill every last one of them for frightening you," he whispered in Italian, probably thinking I could not understand, his hand stroking my hair while I shook against him. The boutique had become a crime scene, security swarming, designer bags scattered across the floor near puddles of blood, the juxtaposition of luxury and violence making it all feel surreal. Marco appeared beside us, his expression grim. "The Bratva," he said quietly. "They're making moves in Southeast Asia, targeting Moretti interests. This was a grab attempt." Dante's arms tightened around me and I felt the tension vibrating through his body, barely controlled rage held in check only by my presence. "You're coming back to Italy," he said, switching to English as he pulled back to look at my face. "This region isn't safe anymore." "Nowhere is safe with you," I replied, my voice shaking as badly as my hands. "Everywhere we go, people are trying to kill you or kidnap me or burn down the world around us. Then I'll make the world safe," he said with such conviction it sounded like a vow. "Whatever it takes, I will eliminate every threat until you can walk through a hotel boutique without being hunted." He shrugged out of his suit jacket and wrapped it around my shoulders, the fabric still warm from his body and smelling of his cologne mixed with adrenaline. They took me to the penthouse while police and hotel security dealt with the crime scene below, and I sat on his leather sofa wrapped in his jacket, trying to process what had just happened. I had seen a man die, had watched violence up close and personal instead of just hearing about it afterward, and the reality of Dante's world crashed over me like a wave. He poured whiskey with hands that were steadier than mine, sitting beside me close enough that our legs touched. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I knew there were risks, but I thought Singapore was neutral territory. I underestimated how bold the Bratva would be." "They spoke Italian," I heard myself say. "They thought I couldn't understand, but I could. They were planning to ransom me for $10 million. Dante's expression went very still. "You speak Italian." "My grandmother was from Naples," I replied. "I understood everything they said and everything you said after." His jaw tightened as he realized I had heard his whispered promise to kill them all for frightening me. "Good," he said finally. "Then you know I meant it. Every word." The Moretti estate rose from the Tuscan hills like something out of a Renaissance painting, a 16th-century villa of honey-colored stone surrounded by vineyards and cypress trees, walls that had once defended against invading armies now protecting against modern threats. Armed guards were positioned discreetly throughout the grounds, their presence barely visible but unmistakable once you knew to look. And as we drove up the long gravel drive, I felt the weight of history and tragedy pressing down from every ancient stone. Marco greeted us at the entrance with obvious relief at having Dante back on protected ground, and behind him stood a woman in her 60s with silver hair swept into an elegant chignon and eyes the same ice gray as her nephew. "This is my Aunt Isabella," Dante said, his tone softening in a way I had never heard. "She raised me after my parents died. She runs the household and tolerates no nonsense from anyone, including me." Isabella's assessing gaze swept over me with shrewd intelligence, taking in my rumpled clothes from travel and the haunted look I knew still lingered in my eyes from Singapore. "So, you're the girl who spilled wine on my nephew and somehow survived the experience," she said in accented English, her lips curving in a slight smile. "Come, you look exhausted. Let me show you to your rooms while Dante handles business he has neglected." The villa's interior was breathtaking, frescoed ceilings depicting classical scenes, marble floors worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, artwork that belonged in museums hanging casually on walls as if beauty this profound was simply normal. Isabella led me through corridors that twisted and turned, explaining the history of each room we passed, until we reached a suite that overlooked the gardens. "My nephew doesn't bring women here," she said, watching my reaction carefully. "This estate is sacred to him. It's where he grew up, where his family lived and died. The fact that you're here tells me something." "I'm just an employee," I replied, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "You're a fool if you believe that," Isabella said bluntly. "I've known Dante since he was born. I raised him after Antonio and Maria were killed. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you, like you're the only solid thing in a world of smoke." Before I could respond, she left, closing the door softly behind her, and I stood alone in a bedroom that was larger than my entire apartment had been, surrounded by antiques and luxury that made my presence feel like an intrusion. That evening, Dante found me in the villa's library, a room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books that smelled of old paper and history, and without speaking, he began showing me his collection. First editions of Dante Alighieri, illuminated manuscripts, books that had been in his family for generations, each one a piece of the heritage he carried. He moved through the space with a reverence I had not seen in him before, touching the spines gently, and I realized this was the most honest version of himself he had ever shown me. "Come," he said finally, "I want to show you the gardens before the light fades." The gardens were extraordinary, formal Italian design mixed with wild beauty, roses and lavender and herbs, creating a symphony of scent in the twilight air. We walked in silence until we reached a small fountain surrounded by white roses, and Dante stopped, his expression shifting to something painful. "My sister died in these gardens," he said quietly. "She was 16, I was 19. I was supposed to protect her." "What happened?" I asked, though part of me was afraid of the answer. "I failed," he said simply. "Enemies of my father wanted to send a message. They took Lucia while I was in the city handling business I thought was more important. By the time I got back, she was already gone." His jaw tightened. "They left her body here by this fountain as a warning, as proof that even at home we were vulnerable." The anguish in his voice was raw, unguarded, the wound still bleeding after all these years. "That's why you're so protective," I said, understanding clicking into place. "Why you need to control everything, why you can't let anyone be vulnerable around you." "Because I couldn't protect her," he agreed. "Because I was arrogant and thought our name alone would keep her safe, and I learned the hardest way possible that power means nothing if you're not willing to be ruthless in using it." The Tuscan sunset painted everything gold and pink, the scent of lavender heavy in the air, cypresses standing like sentinels against the darkening sky. "After Lucia died, I became someone no one would dare touch," he continued. "I eliminated everyone involved in her death, then everyone who might have known about it, then everyone who represented even a potential threat. I burned entire organizations to the ground until people understood that touching a Moretti meant death for 3 generations of your family." The casual brutality of it should have terrified me, but instead, I saw the devastated 19-year-old boy underneath, someone who had lost everything and rebuilt himself as a weapon. "I'm not Lucia," I said gently. "I know," he replied, finally looking at me. "But you're under my protection now, and I won't fail again. I can't." The weight of his promise hung in the air between us as darkness fell over the estate. The formal dinner had been another exercise in humiliation. 20 of Dante's associates gathered around the villa's ancient dining table while I served course after course like some medieval servant, feeling their eyes assess me and make assumptions about what I was to him. By the time the last guest departed, I was vibrating with suppressed rage, walking out onto the terrace to breathe air that did not smell of cigar smoke and masculine entitlement. "You can't just buy people, Dante," I said when I heard him follow me onto the stone terrace, the words exploding out of me before he could speak. "You can't purchase an airline and hire bodyguards and move my brother across the world and expect me to be grateful for the cage you've built." "I didn't buy you," he replied, moving closer. "I freed you from debt and desperation and a life that was slowly killing you. By making me your prisoner," I shot back, turning to face him. "By stripping away every choice, every shred of autonomy, by making me completely dependent on you for everything, including my brother's survival. By giving you a choice you never had before," he countered, his voice rising to match mine. "You were drowning, Maya, working yourself to death for a brother you couldn't save and a future that didn't exist. I gave you options." "What choice?" I demanded, backing up until I hit the stone balustrade, trapped between cold rock and his advancing presence. "Everything in my life is controlled by you. Where I live, where I work, who I see, what I do. You've orchestrated every detail like I'm a puppet, and you're pulling strings." "Then control this," he said, and closed the distance between us, backing me fully against the balustrade until I could feel his breath on my face, see the silver flecks in his gray eyes catching moonlight. His mouth came down on mine before I could protest, possessive and desperate and claiming, one hand sliding into my hair while the other gripped my waist, and for one insane moment, I kissed him back. My hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, even as my brain screamed that this was wrong, was exactly what he wanted, was me surrendering the last piece of myself I had managed to keep separate from his control. The kiss tasted like whiskey and frustration and weeks of tension finally breaking, and when I finally found the strength to push him away, my hand moved on instinct, slapping him hard enough that the crack echoed across the terrace. He took it without moving, his cheek reddening, his eyes never leaving mine, and the lack of reaction was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. "That can never happen again," I said, my voice shaking as badly as my hands. "It will," he replied with absolute certainty. "We both know it will. We've been heading toward this since the moment you spilled that wine." "I'm furious at you," I whispered, pressing my fingers to my lips that still burned from his kiss. "I know," he said, not moving closer but his presence somehow filling all the space between us. "I'm furious at myself for wanting you this badly, for losing control, for needing you in ways that make me vulnerable." The villa terrace stretched behind us, Florence's lights glittering like fallen stars in the valley below, cypress trees standing dark and silent against the night sky. The stone beneath my hands still held warmth from the day's sun, and the scent of night-blooming jasmine hung heavy in the air, mixing with the distant sound of crickets and music drifting from the now empty dining room. "You look at me like I'm salvation and damnation combined," I said, trying to understand what I had seen in his eyes during that kiss. "Because you are," he replied. "You're everything I've trained myself not to want, vulnerability and authenticity, and someone who makes me forget to be careful." His hand lifted as if to touch my face, then dropped. "I've spent my entire adult life being controlled, being calculating, being 3 steps ahead of everyone, and you make me want to just exist in the moment without strategy. That terrifies me," I admitted. "This thing between us, it's not equal. You hold all the power and I hold none. And if I give in to this, I lose the last piece of myself I've managed to protect." "You think I have power here," he said, a bitter smile crossing his face. "You've had me obsessed since that first moment. You're the one thing I can't calculate or control or predict. Every rule I've built my life on crumbles when you're near me." The air between us crackled with want and anger and fear and possibilities neither of us were ready to name. Moonlight turned everything silver and unreal, made the moment feel suspended outside of normal time, and I knew we had crossed a line we could never uncross. Whatever this arrangement had been before, employee and employer, captor and captive, protector and protected, it had just shifted into something far more dangerous and complicated. I should go inside, I said, but I did not move. You should, he agreed, but neither did he. We stood on that terrace while Florence glittered below us, while jasmine perfumed the air and crickets sang, both of us knowing that everything had just changed irrevocably, and neither of us certain whether that change would save us or destroy us completely. I had broken into Dante's private office looking for information about the Bratva threat, telling myself I had a right to know what dangers surrounded me, but what I found destroyed me in ways no external enemy ever could. The files were spread across his desk in the harsh morning light, surveillance photos of me from months before the wine incident, detailed reports on Leo's medical condition updated weekly going back 6 months, and email correspondence with Patricia, my supervisor, that made my blood run cold. The turbulence was timed perfectly, Marco had written. She stumbled exactly as predicted and spilled the entire glass. Moretti was very pleased with the execution. I was still staring at the words, trying to make them mean something other than what they clearly stated, when Dante walked in and found me surrounded by evidence of his manipulation. Everything was a lie, I said, my voice unnaturally calm. Even the beginning, the wine spill, the one moment I thought was genuine accident, you orchestrated all of it. Not a lie, he corrected, moving to his desk without apparent concern that I had discovered his machinations. A strategy. There's a difference. I saw an opportunity, and I created the circumstances to capitalize on it. You manipulated my entire life, I shouted, the calm shattering as rage flooded through me. You saw me on some flight months ago, and decided to what? Make me your pet project. You researched my dying brother and waited for him to get worse so you could swoop in like some savior. I saved your entire life, he shot back, his own voice rising. Now, your brother would be dead without me. You would be homeless and drowning in debt. I gave you options you never would have had. You used my dying brother as leverage, I said, my hands shaking as I picked up the medical reports with his handwritten notes in the margins. You monitored his condition. You knew he was getting worse. You waited until I was desperate enough to accept anything. That's not love, Dante. That's sociopathy. Perhaps, he agreed, rounding the desk to face me directly. But you're alive. Leo's alive and thriving in Tokyo with the best care money can buy. You're safe and protected and free from the crushing weight you carried before. Does my methodology really matter when the results are objectively better for you? It matters because I thought I had some choice, I whispered, the fight draining out of me into devastation. I thought that even though you trapped me, there was at least one genuine moment between us. One thing that was real and not calculated. His expression hardened. In my world, nothing is left to chance. I saw you months ago during a flight to London. You were exhausted and kind to an elderly passenger who was difficult. You had this way of moving like you carried the weight of the world, and I wanted to know everything about you. So you had me investigated and found a dying brother and desperate circumstances and decided I was vulnerable enough to manipulate. I found someone worth protecting, he countered. Someone who deserved better than the hand life dealt her. And yes, I created the opportunity for us to meet. I made sure you would spill that wine. I arranged for Patricia to be looking for reasons to fire you, so you would be desperate when I made my offer. He moved closer and I backed away, unable to bear his proximity. But everything I've done since has been to keep you safe. The financial records showed payments to Patricia, to hospital administrators, to airline executives, a paper trail of his manipulations stretching back months before that fateful flight. He had been planning this, researching me, waiting for the perfect moment to insert himself into my life, and I had believed it was fate or accident or anything except calculated predation. Did you ever intend to let me have a choice? I asked. Or was this always about possession? About seeing something you wanted and taking it regardless of what I wanted? I intended to give you better choices than you had, he replied. Working yourself to death for minimum wage while your brother died slowly was not a choice. It was a slow march toward destruction. I offered you something better. By taking away my agency completely, I shot back. Every decision I've made since that flight has been under duress or manipulation. Even my feelings for you developed under false pretenses, because I thought you were protecting me when really you were just protecting your investment. His jaw tightened. Your feelings for me are real regardless of how they started, are they? I demanded. How do I know what's real when everything was orchestrated? When even the moment I think of as our beginning was staged like some elaborate performance with me as the unwitting actor. The morning sun streaming through the windows was harsh and unforgiving, making the beauty of the villa's art and architecture feel sinister, oppressive, a gilded trap I had walked into because he had carefully constructed the path. You can't do this, I said, my voice breaking. You can't manipulate someone's entire existence and expect them to be grateful. You can't use a dying child as leverage and call it love. I never said it was love, Dante replied coldly. I said it was protection. I said, I protect what's mine, and you became mine the moment I decided you were worth the effort of acquiring. The clinical way he said it, like I was a business asset or a piece of property, shattered something fundamental inside me. I need to leave, I said. I need to get away from you and think and figure out what's real anymore. You can't leave, he said flatly. The Bratva still has a price on your head. Leaving my protection means death within a week. So I'm still trapped, I said bitterly. Still owned, still controlled. Just now I know exactly how thoroughly you've stolen my life. I waited until Dante left for a meeting in Florence, then moved quickly and efficiently like I had been planning this for weeks instead of hours. The safe in his office opened easily once I figured out the combination was Lucia's birthday, and I took enough cash to disappear, to get to Tokyo and collect Leo, and vanish into whatever witness protection program would take us. My bag was packed with essentials, and I made it out of the villa while the staff was changing shifts, walked 3 miles to the main road and caught a bus into Florence, my heart pounding the entire time with the certainty that someone would stop me. The train station was crowded with morning commuters, the smell of espresso and diesel fumes mixing in the air, pigeons scattering as travelers rushed past, focused on their own destinations and oblivious to my desperation. I bought a ticket to Milan with cash, sat on a platform bench with my escape bag at my feet, and waited for the train that would be the first step toward freedom. Marco sat down beside me so quietly I did not notice until he spoke. The 9:15 to Milan, he observed, not looking at me. Good choice, fast route, lots of connections from there. I should have run, but exhaustion and futility kept me frozen on that bench. How did you find me? I asked. Dante has tracking devices in everything he gives you, Marco replied, still watching the trains rather than me. Clothing, bags, even that bracelet with the panic button, he knew the moment you left the villa. So I never had a chance. You had a chance, he said gently. You took it, you got further than most would, but now you need to understand why going further would be suicide. I'm tired of being told what I need. To understand, I said. But tears were already forming because I knew he was right. You think you're trapped, Marco continued. You're not trapped, you're protected. There's a difference even if it doesn't feel like it. There's a difference, I asked bitterly. In this world, no, he admitted. But Dante would die for you, and that's not nothing. I've worked for the Moretti family for 30 years, and I've never seen him this way about anyone. He'd kill for me too, I said. I've seen it. I've watched people die because of me. Yes, he would, Marco agreed. He has. The 3 men who tried to take you in Singapore are dead. Not just the one you saw, but all of them. Dante tracked down the other two personally. That's supposed to make me feel better, I demanded. It's supposed to make you understand what you mean to him, Marco replied. The Bratva has a bounty on your head, Maya. €500,000 to whoever brings you to them alive. They've already hit 2 of Dante's properties looking for you, killed 4 of our men searching for information about where you're kept. My stomach dropped. Since when? Since Singapore, he said. Since you became publicly connected to Dante, since they realized hurting you would hurt him more than any business loss could, you're his weakness now, and in our world, weaknesses get exploited. So I can never leave, I whispered. Not while the Bratva wants you, Marco said. Not while you represent leverage against the most powerful man in Southern Europe. Leaving Dante's protection means you'd be dead within a week, probably less. I put my face in my hands, the tears coming freely now, mourning the freedom I had never really possessed. He manipulated everything, Marco. He engineered the wine spill. He used Leo's illness. He's been controlling my entire life like I'm a puppet. I know, Marco said quietly. I helped him. I'm the one who tipped the plane at the right moment. I'm the one who suggested using your brother's medical condition as leverage, and I'm not proud of it, but I'm also not sorry, because I've watched what you've done to him. What I've done to him, I started. You've made him human again, Marco interrupted. After Lucia died, Dante became something cold and calculating. He eliminated threats and built empires and protected what was his. But he didn't live, he just survived. His voice softened. Then he saw you being kind to that elderly woman on a flight, and something shifted. He started talking about the future instead of just the next threat. He started caring about something other than revenge and power. A train arrived, but not mine, and commuters surged past us while we sat frozen in our conversation. He loves you, Marco said finally. He doesn't know how to show it without controlling it. He doesn't know how to protect without possessing. But he loves you. And if you leave, and the Bratva kills you, the guilt will destroy what's left of his humanity. I looked at my bag sitting beside me on the platform, containing everything I owned, and representing a freedom I could never actually claim, then at Marco, who sat with the patience of someone who knew I had already lost. What happens now? I asked. Now you come home, he said, and you decide if you can find a way to live in Dante's world, find a way to have agency within the protection he provides, or you stay and resent him until that resentment poisons everything. The smell of espresso from the platform cafe mixed with diesel fumes as trains came and went, and I realized I was a bird in a cage where the door stood open, but predators circled outside waiting. I had never been trapped by Dante so much as by the world he inhabited, and the enemies his protection was the only shield against. The attack came at 2 a.m, explosions that shook the villa's ancient foundations, followed by the rapid chatter of automatic weapons fire that shattered the night's peace. Dante was in my room within seconds, fully dressed and armed, his face set in lines of controlled fury as he pulled me from bed. They've breached the walls, he said, dragging me toward the door while gunfire echoed through corridors that had stood for 400 years. We need to get you to the safe room now. The villa had transformed into a war zone, Dante's men exchanging fire with dozens of attackers who had somehow overwhelmed the perimeter defenses, and I watched in horror as a man I recognized from dinner 2 nights ago went down with blood spreading across his chest. Marco appeared from a side corridor, his weapon raised and his expression grim as he provided cover while Dante rushed me down a stone staircase I had never seen before, down into the villa's foundations where medieval dungeons had been converted into modern panic room. The space was reinforced steel disguised as ancient stone, emergency lighting casting everything in shades of red, and the smell of concrete and gun oil was overwhelming as Dante sealed the door behind us with mechanisms that looked like something from a bank vault. He moved to a weapons cabinet and withdrew a handgun, checking it with practiced efficiency before turning to me. "Have you ever fired a gun?" he asked, and when I shook my head, he moved behind me, positioning my hands correctly on the grip, showing me how to aim, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger instead of pulling. If anyone comes through that door who isn't me or Marco, you shoot first and ask questions never, he said, his breath warm against my ear. Aim for center mass and keep firing until they stop moving. I can't, I whispered, the weapon feeling impossibly heavy in my shaking hands. You can, he said firmly, turning me to face him. You will, because your survival depends on it, because I need to know you can protect yourself if something happens to me. If I don't come back, he started, but I cut him off. Don't say that, I said, terror flooding through me. You're not leaving me here alone. If I don't come back, Marco will get you and Leo to New Zealand. He continued as if I hadn't spoken. New identities, clean break, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You'll be free, Maya, truly free. Dante, please. You were right, he said, his hands coming up to frame my face. I manipulated you. I orchestrated everything. I used your brother and your desperation, and I'm not sorry because it brought you here, but you were right to be furious. Everything I did was calculated except what I feel for you. That was never strategy. The sound of an explosion rocked the bunker, and dust sifted down from reinforced ceiling. I have to go, he said, pressing a quick, desperate kiss to my lips. Remember what I showed you. Shoot first. I'll come back for you. Then he was gone, the vault door sealing behind him with a finality that sounded like a tomb closing, and I was alone in red-tinged darkness with a gun in my shaking hands, and the sounds of battle filtering through steel and stone. Hours passed in that underground prison while I listened to violence unfold above me, the chatter of automatic weapons punctuated by explosions, screaming in multiple languages, the sounds of men fighting and dying to protect their territory and their leader. I sat with my back against cold steel, the gun pointed at the door with hands that cramped from gripping too tight, and prayed to gods I did not believe in for Dante's survival. I realized with crystalline clarity that I loved him, that somewhere between manipulation and protection, between control and care, I had fallen for the monster who had orchestrated my entire life. If he died up there defending his home and his people, then something essential in me would die too. The part that had started to believe in possibility instead of just survival. The emergency lighting flickered, and I heard footsteps approaching the vault, multiple sets moving with purpose, and my finger tightened on the trigger as fear flooded my system with adrenaline. The door handle turned, the locking mechanism beginning to disengage, and I aimed for where I estimated center mass would be when the door opened, ready to fire at whoever came through, because Dante had told me to shoot first, and that was the only instruction I could hold on to in my terror. Kara. It's me, Dante's voice came through the steel. Don't shoot, I'm coming in. The door swung open and he stood there covered in blood and soot, his shirt torn and a gash across his cheekbone, but alive, gloriously alive, and I dropped the gun as I launched myself at him. He caught me, his arms closing around me with desperate strength, and I felt him shaking with either exhaustion or adrenaline or emotion he could not contain. Is it over? I asked against his chest. It's over, he confirmed, his hand stroking my hair. The Bratva lost 30 men. We lost 8. But they're retreating. They know now that coming for you costs more than they're willing to pay. I pulled back to look at his face, at the exhaustion and violence written there, and saw the man underneath the monster, the one who had just risked everything to protect me. You came back, I said stupidly. I promised I would, he replied, and something in his expression was raw and vulnerable in a way I had never seen. Did you mean it? I asked. What you said before you left, about your feelings being real. Every word, he said quietly, and I kissed him there in that underground bunker, with the sounds of dying battle filtering down from above and the smell of gunpowder and blood surrounding us. Dawn was breaking through windows shattered by gunfire when the doctor finally finished stitching the bullet wound in Dante's shoulder. the villa around us damaged but still standing, a testament to both its ancient construction and modern fortifications. Bodies were being removed from the grounds, 8 of Dante's men who had died defending the estate, and the smell of smoke and blood hung in the air, making everything feel surreal. I sat beside him on his bed despite the doctor's presence, my hands needing to touch him, to confirm he was alive and whole despite the bandages and bruises, and he watched me with something like wonder in his exhausted eyes. "You stayed," he said quietly after the doctor left, like he still could not quite believe it. "You could have run when the shooting started, but you stayed in that bunker like I told you to." "Where else would I go?" I replied, my fingers tracing the edge of his bandage with infinite care. "You think I could just leave while you were up here fighting?" "I think most people in your position would have," he said, catching my hand and pressing it to his chest where I could feel his heart beating steady and strong. "I think most people would have taken the opportunity to escape." I kissed him instead of answering, tasting blood and smoke and survival, and when we finally broke apart, his expression had shifted to something resolved. "I'm releasing you from our contract," he said, and the words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" I managed. "Your contract, your employment? I'm ending it effective immediately," he continued, his voice firm despite the exhaustion. "I'm giving you $2 million and new identities for you and Leo. Marco has already made the arrangements. You can leave today if you want. Go anywhere in the world. Be anyone you want to be." "Why now?" I asked, confusion and hurt warring inside me. "Why are you letting me go after everything? After buying an airline and manipulating my life and nearly dying to protect me?" "Because I finally understand," he said, his gray eyes holding mine with painful honesty. "If you stay out of fear or obligation, if you stay because you think you have no choice, then I'll never really have you. I'll just own you, and that's not what I want anymore." "What do you want?" I whispered. "I want you to choose this," he replied. "Choose me, freely and completely, knowing everything I am and everything I've done. Or choose freedom, choose safety, choose a life without violence and control. And a man who doesn't know how to love without possessing. And if I don't, if I choose to leave, then you were right," he said, something vulnerable and raw in his voice. "I bought you, I manipulated you, I controlled every aspect of your life. But I never truly won you, and that's my failure, not yours. I thought I could orchestrate your feelings the way I orchestrate everything else, but love doesn't work that way." The morning light was harsh through the broken windows, showing the full extent of the night's damage, walls pocked with bullet holes, furniture destroyed, bloodstains on ancient stone floors that had seen violence before, but never quite like this. "You're asking me to choose a life of violence and control," I said, gesturing at the wreckage around us. "No," he corrected. "I'm asking you to choose me, all of me, the darkness and the violence and the obsession. The man who will kill to protect you and manipulate circumstances to keep you close. The man who doesn't know how to love gently, but loves you anyway with everything he has." He winced as he shifted position, the movement pulling at his injured shoulder. "If you can't accept that, if the price of being with me is too high, then I understand and I'll let you go. Truly let you go this time." I stood and moved to the window, looking out at the Tuscan countryside that had become my prison and my sanctuary, at the gardens where Lucia had died and where Dante had first shown me his vulnerability, at the armed men still patrolling the perimeter, because even after last night's victory, the threats never really ended. "I love you," I said, the admission falling into the quiet room like a stone into still water. I don't know if that's real or if it's Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding, or some psychological response to captivity. I don't know if I can trust my own feelings when they developed under such manipulation. But I know that when I thought you might die last night, something in me broke. I know that I can't imagine walking away from you even though the smart choice is obvious. I turned to face him, finding him watching me with an expression I could not fully read. I know that you're dangerous and controlling, and you've stolen my agency more thoroughly than anyone ever has, I continued. I know that life with you means violence and fear and never really being safe. I know all of that, and I'm choosing you anyway because apparently I'm as broken as you are. The relief that flooded his face was immediate and total, his control slipping enough to show raw emotion underneath. You're not broken, he said. You're the strongest person I've ever met, strong enough to survive everything I put you through and still have the courage to stay. I moved back to the bed, sitting beside him again. I have conditions, I said. Anything, he replied immediately. I want Leo to grow up as normally as possible, protected but not imprisoned. I want to be involved in decisions that affect my life. I want partnership, not possession. I want you to promise that you'll try to control less and trust more. Done, he agreed without hesitation. All of it. Whatever you need, I'll give you. And I want you to promise that if I ever truly want to leave, if I ever decide this isn't working, you'll let me go without manipulation or machinations or orchestrating circumstances to keep me trapped. That one cost him. I could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the way his hand fisted in the bedsheet, but finally he nodded. I promise, he said. If you want to leave, I'll let you go. No manipulation. I'll give you everything you need to disappear completely. Then I'm never leaving, I said, and kissed him there in the ruins of the night's violence, choosing the monster who loved me over the freedom I had thought I wanted. I took the money and the new identities, flew to New Zealand with Leo, who was recovering beautifully from his treatment, and we started the life I had always told myself I wanted. The cottage was whitewashed and charming, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean where seabirds called and the scent of salt air mixed with the fresh bread I baked each morning. Leo thrived, attending school for the first time in 2 years, making friends, laughing in the garden while I watched from the kitchen window and told myself this was happiness. But I was miserable in ways I could not articulate, going through the motions of normal life while feeling like a ghost, working at a local cafe, serving coffee to people who smiled and made small talk about weather and weekend plans while I felt hollow inside. I lay awake at night listening to waves crash against rocks below and thought about Dante, about ice-gray eyes and dangerous hands, about the feeling of being seen completely, even when that visibility meant losing all privacy. I saw him in every dark-haired stranger who walked past the cafe window, felt my heart leap and then plummet when they turned and were just ordinary men with ordinary lives. Leo asked me one morning over breakfast why I looked sad when we finally had peace, his healthy face so full of concern that it broke my heart. Sometimes safety isn't enough, sweetie, I admitted, pushing eggs around my plate without appetite. Do you miss him? Leo asked with the directness only children possess. The man who saved me. The one you worked for. Every day, I whispered, and saying it aloud made the ache worse. I checked news sites obsessively for mentions of Moretti Holdings, read articles about Dante expanding legitimate business operations, about rumors of gang wars ending and territories stabilizing, and wondered if he was moving on, building the life he wanted without me complicating it. Then Isabella called 3 months after I left, her voice tight with worry. He's destroying himself, Kara, she said without preamble. Taking risks he never would have taken before, walking into dangerous situations without proper security. He's given up. Come home or let him go completely. Because this half-existence is killing him. What if I can't give him what he needs, I asked, tears already forming. What if he needs someone who can accept his world without question, and I'll always be fighting against the control? What if you're exactly what he needs? Isabella countered. What if the fact that you fight him, that you challenge him, that you left when he gave you the choice? What if that's exactly why he loves you? Because you're not afraid to walk away? After the call ended, I sat in my perfect cottage with its ocean views and peaceful existence and admitted what I had known for weeks. Freedom without love was its own kind of cage. Safety without passion was just existing, not living. And I had chosen wrong. Leo found me that evening staring at a photo of Dante I had hidden in my drawer. One Isabella had sent me months ago, showing him at some business function, looking handsome and remote and utterly alone. "You should go back to him," Leo said, sitting beside me on the bed. "He saved my life, he gave us everything, and you've been sad every single day since we left." "I can't just show up after 3 months," I protested weakly. "Why not?" Leo asked with perfect child logic. "If you love him and he loves you, then everything else is just details." The next morning, I booked flights back to Italy, my hands shaking as I confirmed the tickets, terror and anticipation warring inside me. The New Zealand cottage with its whitewashed walls and seabird calls and perfect peaceful existence had been everything I thought I wanted, but it turned out what I actually needed was a dangerous man with gray eyes who loved me enough to let me go, and whom I loved enough to return to, despite knowing exactly what that choice meant. I packed our bags while Leo danced around excited to be going on an adventure, and I looked one last time at the life I was abandoning, the safety and normalcy and freedom I had thought mattered most. Then I closed the door on that tranquil prison and chose instead the violent, complicated, passionate reality of loving Dante Moretti, chose the man over the peace, chose authentic feeling over comfortable numbness, and prayed that he would still want me after I had walked away, when he finally gave me the choice he should have given me from the beginning. I walked into Moretti Holdings headquarters 3 months after leaving Italy, using security codes that Dante had never changed, because some part of him had been waiting for exactly this moment. The receptionist tried to stop me, but I moved past her with the confidence of someone who belonged, taking the elevator to the top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Florence in all its Renaissance glory. He was in a meeting. I could hear voices through his office door, dangerous-sounding men speaking in Italian about territories and shipments and things I probably should not understand, but I pushed the door open anyway and walked in. Dante looked up, and his entire world stopped. I watched his carefully constructed mask shatter completely as shock and hope and desperate longing flooded his face in rapid succession. The room full of suited men turned to stare at the interruption, hands moving toward weapons until Dante held up one hand, freezing them all in place. "Everyone out," he said, his voice rough like he had not used it properly in weeks. "Now." The men filed out quickly, Marco catching my eye as he passed and giving me a small, knowing smile. And then we were alone in that sleek modern office with afternoon sun streaming through windows and turning everything golden. "I have conditions," I said before he could speak, before I could lose my nerve. "Anything," he replied immediately, standing but not moving closer like he was afraid I might disappear if he reached for me. "You don't even know what they are yet," I pointed out. "I don't care," he said, his gray eyes holding mine with an intensity that stole my breath. "Name them. I'll give you anything you ask for and things you don't think to ask for. Just tell me you're staying." "I want Leo to have a normal childhood," I said, my voice steadying as I spoke. "Protected but not imprisoned, friends and school, and the ability to make his own choices as he grows up." "Done," Dante agreed without hesitation. "I want to know about your business," I continued. "The legitimate parts and the darker parts. I want to be consulted on decisions that affect me and my brother. I want to be your partner, not your possession." "Done," he said again, already nodding. "All of it. What else?" "I want you to promise that if I ever truly want to leave, if I ever decide this isn't working or I can't handle this life, you'll let me go," I said. "The hardest condition last. No manipulations, no machinations, no orchestrating circumstances to keep me trapped. You'll let me walk away freely." The request cost him everything. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands fisted at his sides, the visible struggle between his nature and what I was asking. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if this was the line he could not cross, the promise he could not make. "I promise," he finally said, the words seeming torn from somewhere deep inside. "If you want to leave, I'll let you go. I'll give you everything you need to disappear, and I won't follow, I won't interfere. I'll let you walk away, even though it will destroy me." "Then I'm never leaving," I said, and watched relief flood his features so completely he looked almost young. In front of anyone who might be watching through the glass walls, in front of his entire organization who I knew would hear about this within the hour, Dante Moretti dropped to his knees before me. The gesture shocked me silent. This powerful man who commanded fear and respect across southern Europe, kneeling like a knight before his queen, his head bowed in submission that was somehow more intimate than any touch. "You are not my prisoner," he said clearly, his voice carrying weight of vow. "You are not my possession, or my employee, or my obligation. You are my equal, my choice, my heart. And I kneel before you, so that everyone knows the power between us has shifted." I felt tears streaming down my face as I reached down to cup his face, tilting it up so I could see his eyes. "Stand up," I whispered. "Stand up and kiss me." He rose in one fluid movement and pulled me against him, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that tasted like coming home after a long exile, desperate and tender and claiming all at once. I kissed him back with everything I had, with 3 months of missing him and choosing him and returning to him, and when we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "I love you," I said. "I chose safety and freedom and peace, and I was miserable every single day because none of it mattered without you." "I love you," he replied, his forehead resting against mine. "I let you go because I finally understood that real love requires freedom, and you came back, which means everything." Through the glass walls, I could see Marco and several other men pretending not to watch, and I knew this moment would become legend in the organization. The day Dante Moretti knelt before a woman who had spilled wine on him and somehow stolen his heart. 6 months later, we stood in the villa gardens where Lucia had died, where white roses bloomed eternal, and Dante slipped a ring onto my finger, while Leo stood beside us beaming with health and happiness. The life we built was not traditional or safe or anything a reasonable person would choose, but it was ours, built on honest foundation after manipulation had been stripped away, partnership after possession had been rejected. He had bought an airline to keep me close, had orchestrated every detail of my life to trap me. But ultimately, he had won me by learning to let go, by giving me the choice he should have given me from the start. And I had chosen him, freely and completely, choosing danger over safety, passion over peace, choosing the monster who loved me enough to kneel. That was the real beginning, not the wine spill or the manipulation or the forced proximity, but the moment when we both chose each other, with eyes wide open and hearts fully committed, building something real from the ashes of control and creating a love that was messy and complicated and absolutely worth every risk.